when it comes to that geographic isolation, also, I was speaking to an artist
Mhm.
who, has started to do business on Nerdcrawler.
Mhm.
And, one of the things that was pointed out to me is just in terms of where the art was being shipped to.
Mhm.
It definitely ties together with your point.
Yeah.
I believe it was a part of Australia that isn't a convention hub.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
you're definitely attracting buyers who, like you said, may not be able to just go down the street, take a quick train ride, and see a lot of our favorite comic artists and participate in an artist alley kind
Yeah.
of situation. So in that sense, Nerdcrawler as a virtual artist alley, it's caught on and people are taking advantage of that.
I feel like that's a great soundbite.
Hey, what's up, everybody? SG here for the Fandamn Collectibles YouTube channel. And our guest for today is Chris from Nerdcrawler. Nerdcrawler, of course, an exciting new platform for comic original art. Lots of questions swirling out there, lots of excitement, lots of buzz. And Chris is here to help us really navigate exactly what's going on with Nerdcrawler and what we should expect from the platform. So, Chris, thank you for being on with us today.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and really your role with Nerdcrawler?
Yeah. Super excited to be here to just talk comics, and I love doing these because then I get to see people's houses, and I see your Funko collection in the background, and I love it. This is like the best stuff. So, a little bit about me. So yeah, I am the founder of Nerdcrawler. Nerdcrawler right now is me plus a couple of advisors, but whether it's customer service, Instagram stories, marketing, product engineering, whatever, I'm probably doing like 99% of it. So I'm happy to answer questions today. Some interesting kind of backstory about me. I've loved X-Men since I was a kid. It's my first memory with my dad watching X-Men the animated series. Marvel Comics was my first real job. So I got an internship at the X-Men office, working with like Nick Lowe, Joey LaHoop, Janine Schaefer, and Daniel Ketchum. That was in college. And then I moved out to New York and I started working in some marketing jobs in tech. But then I was super pumped to get a job at Comixology. You guys probably know, but I'll tell it for everybody else. Comixology was the #1 way to read comic books on your iPhone and Android device before we were acquired by Amazon. And then since then, I worked at other tech companies like Google and things like that. And ultimately, though, I've always loved tech and I've loved comics, right? You can look behind me, like Gambit's right there, right? Or right there. And so I wanted to build something that I could do for the space because I felt it was underserved. And I was talking to a bunch of different artists, but one in particular was like Mike Choi, where he was really loving Whatnot as a way to buy. But then I was poking on like selling on Whatnot. And he was like, as a creator, though, it's a little bit different because the way the platform works and things like that. And he's like, if you can figure out a better way to do it, I think that'd be interesting. And so then I built Nerdcrawler to start in 2022 as just a way to get alerts for art drops for those maybe interested in like the shoe space, or at the time like PS5 is really hard to get. You can actually use a service to like crawl a website and every minute check to see if like a PlayStation was in stock on Target. And so that's where the origin of the name comes from. Nerdcrawler was a web crawler for like Jim Chung's website and Greg Capullo grab bags and all the Paul Smith in particular. But then that stopped growing. Like it got to a couple hundred users, but didn't really go much further. And then I saw Steve Morger of Big Wow Art auctioning some pieces from like Adam Hughes and folks to help raise money for the Maui fire victims, right? So people who are impacted by the Maui fires. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna take my shot. And I remember there was an Adam Hughes piece that was up for auction, and I knew it'd go for like thousands, but the current bid was like $1,010. So I bid like $1,011, and I was like, in the bottom though, because the way Steve would get bids was all through email. And I was like, there's got to be a better way than taking bids through email. So I emailed him $1,011 or something. And I said, would you be interested in a better way to auction your art? And he was like, you got outbid. And yes. And so then I was like, okay, this is motivation. And I also knew that he was Frank's rep. And so then I built it in like a week, but like it didn't have nearly as many features, but it did this basic stuff. It took a bid you were notified if you got outbid, and it worked. And we raised some money. We sold some pieces from Dan Brereton, and then I think a big one that came later was Ryan Otley, but still like all part of like the Fire charities. And then Frank Cho was the big get, right? So Frank was interested in a way to sell some sketch covers to raise money to buy a new house. And then Steve put us in touch, which was like a life-changing email to get. And ever since then, it's been growing as a marketplace to help people get sketch covers and original art and all that kind of fun stuff.
Wow, a lot to unpack
Yeah.
there. First of all, your pedigree is unbelievable just in terms of your experience both in comics, having interned at Marvel, working at Comixology, and then the tech piece, which obviously is key in creating this new platform. People should feel really confident about Nerdcrawler just based on your background and your experience. But it's one thing to actually figure out a way to make this work on a technical level. From a business perspective, what really gave you the confidence that you could go up against an eBay or whatnot, Comic Link, Heritage? I mean, there's been no shortage of ways for people to get original art and other comic collectibles, but obviously there's the focus on original comic art in particular. But even with that, there is some competition. So why Nerdcrawler? Why now?
Yeah. I guess you could chalk it up to like I was reading Naruto while raising my son, like during paternity leave, and Rock Lee is a character that I love very much because it's like you got to persevere, you got to keep fighting, right? And so he goes up against Gara, like an impossibly difficult person to fight, and he goes really far, right? He makes a name for himself, and so there are giants, right? Like Heritage Auction, eBay, whatnot. These are literally billion-dollar companies. But I also think like, why not? Like you got to try. And like one of the couple of gaps I was seeing was like one, the fees. Like in particular, there's like a really big player. I guess I won't name them, but you're charging 10 to 20% buyer fees and 10 to 20% seller fees. And I was like, okay, so I think at the time like a Frank Miller page sold for like $90,000, and I was like, you're making like anywhere from like 20 to 40% of that transaction. That feels bad. And like to me as a buyer and potentially a seller, right? Because I agree in the old days when you're like like renting out a location, you got to get a person to bang the gavel and you got to do all the events and you got to get the people in the seats. But like nowadays, we're all at home in our PJs bidding on auctions. Like, what value are you really doing that justifies a 40% take on a piece like that, right? And so our fees are 2.5% to 6%. 6% if you're on free, and it's 2.5% if you subscribe to our pro plan at $99 a month. So the take rate drops considerably. And that's just a way to like, if you're free, like you just want to like start listing some stuff, like you're an emerging artist and you can't really afford that big subscription. But like my goal also is to like help you earn more, right? So one, our fees are much lower. Then I'm really proud of the bidding system that I built, which is like counter to eBay's, right? And so like the other things like how do you take on eBay? Well, what does eBay not do well? And it's buyers are super frustrated when someone comes in at like 1 second left
Right.
to then snipe the thing, and then it's like, oh, I lost, and then 48 hours later they relist the thing for like $100 more. Like that's insane, right? Because that means the seller lost out, and the true buyer that really wanted it now has to like go through this like rigmarole of like trying again, right? And so every time you bid on a Nerdcrawler auction, we add 30 seconds in real time, and so that as bidders you have another chance to bid, and then the seller can actually capture more of that kind of true value or like potential value of the piece. And that has resulted in like some really amazing things, like Frank Cho, who previously was selling sketch covers for like 2 to 3,000. A couple of sold for like 4,000. Art Germ was able to get $8,500 for a Gwen Stacy sketch cover, right? Which you've talked about. This is an all-time record for him, right? And for me, as a founder who has thrown a couple ideas at the wall, I know I'm doing a good job if the sellers say, I'm earning more money now, so I can do things like pay for a convention ticket or like pay my bills or whatever, right? And it comes back to that thing of like, you just got to do right by the sellers and the artists. And if I can help them earn a little bit more, then the product is valuable, but also like I'm just doing something good to help people.
Understood. And when we're talking about those all-time highs, because that's obviously what
Yeah.
really stands out to people, um, do you have any numbers that you can disclose just in terms of the amount of registered users, how many users are bidding? Because obviously people hear those little sound bites, Archerm sold a sketch
Yeah.
cover for $8,500. And when you think about that in comparison to the broader economy, a lot of people are like, wow, it seems like folks are kind of pulling back on all things that are luxuries right now. And as much as we love this stuff, it's not something that you need necessarily
Yeah.
to get by. And then when you compare it to what's going on other platforms, there's a little bit of a lull, I'll
Yeah.
say, when it comes to really all collectible sales, but original art would be included in that. So when people see an $8,500 sketch cover sell, one of the first things they wonder about is, well, how many people are actually on this platform that I just
Mhm.
heard about last week?
Yeah. Yeah. So the cool thing is like I'm not eBay, so I can actually tell some stuff. So like this might, I don't know if we want to call this an exclusive or whatever, but I'll just share a couple of things. So monthly active users are 14,000. So that's like people who
Wow.
are visiting Nerdcrawler and at least browsing around. Uh, Weekly active users are 4,000. And then registered users is like almost 2,500 registered users. And then I'll answer your question about like these records. And I think, for those who follow you on Instagram or know that like there are basically a couple of really big high net worth collectors. I can't disclose too much information
Ab-
about them.
no, wouldn't expect you to. That
Yeah,
I
but
understand.
what I can say is like Nerdcrawler is unique in that we are a global marketplace right now. Like we are category constrained to original art, to make it like the best place to buy sketch covers, commissions, and original art. But I think like Whatnot, you have to be US or Canada, I think,
For the most
right?
part, I believe
For the most
so.
part.
They've
Right.
been talking about something with the UK for a while, but I don't
Right.
know if that's actually in place just as of yet.
Right, right. I think that's what I entertain too. And so I think what has made Nerdcrawler unique is that with a kind of global approach, where another thing is the sellers can set the shipping price however they want, and if they need to collect additional payment, I like go for it, right, to ship these pieces all over the world. What I can kind of share is like there are a lot of there there maybe not be a lot of wealthy people, but the the wealth gap, like the amount that they can spend, is really surprising, as I'm sure you've seen. And but what it means in my mind is like somebody who maybe is geographically constrained, who may not be able to go to a convention in like all the awesome ones we have in the states, right? Like for those of us in the States, we're like, oh, I can go to New York Comic Con, I can see like Jim Lee and Art Germ and Frank Cho, like boom, all in one place. If you're geographically constrained, you can't do that without spending tens of thousands of dollars on a trip. And so imagine the savings there and just allocating into like, hey, I'd rather why give my money to United Airlines? I'll just give it to
Right.
Archer, right? And boom, Archer then is able to make to provide more for his family and do awesome stuff with the money that he's earned, and then a collector gets to have a really amazing piece in their home. So yeah.
Makes sense to me. I mean, we're all aware that there are whales out there.
Yeah.
It just seems like the degree to which they've already honed in on Nerdcrawler and are bidding, I think a lot of people are surprised by that. I mean, when you
Yeah.
were going through some of those numbers, 14,000 monthly users, is that? Or
Monthly active users.
views?
Monthly active users. Yeah.
Yeah, monthly active users. I had no clue. I mean,
Yeah.
like, I would have
Yeah.
never have assumed
Yeah.
that, you were already in the tens of thousands in terms of folks
Yeah.
who are visiting Nerdcrawler. So I think for a lot of folks, they look at the bids and there are certain bidder numbers that they've
Yep.
already kind of pieced together. It looks like this person's very well off and
Yeah.
uh, you know, has money to spend for sure, but it can create that illusion that it's a much smaller pool of potential buyers than there actually are.
Yeah.
So okay, that definitely I think goes a long way to giving people a better sense of exactly what's going on. So 14,000, active monthly users, folks. There are a lot of eyes on there, and yeah, there are some bitter numbers you may see again and again and again, but it's not just a private party that we're all watching, so to speak. When it comes to that geographic isolation also, I was speaking to an artist
Mhm.
who has started to do business on Nerdcrawler.
Mhm.
And one of the things that was pointed out to me is just in terms of where the art was being shipped to.
Mhm.
It definitely ties together with your point.
Yeah.
I believe it was a part of Australia that isn't a convention hub.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
you're definitely attracting buyers who, like you said, may not be able to just go down the street, take a quick train ride, and see a lot of our favorite comic artists and participate in an artist alley kind
Yeah.
of a situation. So in that sense, Nerdcrawler as a virtual artist alley, it's caught on and people are taking advantage of
I feel like that's a great soundbite. Like I gotta get that on the site. Like a virtual artist alley, I think is very much how I envision it, which is like we like a lot of the creators also like John Beatty is an example that comes to mind. He just put two pieces up for with him and his son. Like it's a lot of effort to like go out to a show, especially if you're not repped by like the big comic sketch art guys or whatever. Like
that.
props to them for also helping so many creators. But if it's just like you and you got to get the booth and you got to fly and you got to get the hotel and you got to deal with all the germies and eating bad food right on trips, like if I can make a place where these artists are able to just get more exposure and a little bit more revenue on the off con weekends, right? Or the, like the Monday through Friday, right? That means something to me. Like that, like, I think about like the creators that have made so many things that I've loved. And I was literally just reading a terrible post about Larry Hama, who is like, I don't make any money from my GI Joe stuff, and I can't retire because like I don't get a pipeline from all of this
Right.
great Hasbro money, and so I'm going to these cons doing what I can, and I'm like, what if I can just give creators like that also an outlet, right? So that they can do some awesome stuff in the comfort of their own home. That also feels kind of good. Yeah.
That's great to hear. And unfortunately, there are a lot of stories like Larry Hama's. So, once word does spread, I could see a lot of those legendary comic artists who are maybe a little bit tired of the traditional convention grind
Yeah.
turning towards you and trying to see what they can put together via Nerdcrawler.
Yeah.
Um, so in terms of, so you've given us some insight into the numbers, and we talked a little bit already about some potential, I guess, targets for artists who we can find on Nerdcrawler in the not too distant future. Who ideally would you like to see on your platform that's not currently conducting business?
Yeah, you can probably see his piece right there. So Jim Lee is to me the GOAT, right? So like I talk about my first memory with my dad, X-Men the Animated Series. Who did those, right? X-Men number one, right? Like, yeah, exactly. He's the GOAT,
X-Men
right?
4.
And right. And the kindness he gave me to give me that Batman sketch at a convention when I was in high school started the whole thing, and when I was at Comixology, I was actually like, it was a remote meeting. They were, out in LA and I was in their Comixology New York office, but I remember him being on the call. And I was like, oh my God, like you still fanboy, you're freaking out, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
I wasn't weird, but it was also like, oh my God, like my buddy who worked with me was like, dude, that's like Jim Lee. And I was like, yeah, no. Um, and so, yeah, I think that would be great. Also, I do recognize like he doesn't need it, right? Like he doesn't need to list necessarily pieces on Nerdcrawler, but I also do know that like during the pandemic, he did his like 30 for 30, I think is what he called
Yes.
it, series, right? And I do think eBay eventually changed their policy to do a 0% take because it was for charity. I think funding to help like librarians and stuff. But to help iconic creators like that also as like a charitable way to help raise funds because maybe they don't need the money, but there are many institutions that could use those funds. Like a charity auction with Jim Lee or something that would be super cool. Yeah.
I could definitely see you putting that together, especially just with the flexibility that Nerdcrawler has already demonstrated. I could see maybe the next time around, Jim Lee decides instead of trying to work something out with eBay, although he's the person to do it, he definitely has the
Yeah.
pull.
Yeah.
Nerdcrawler might just be the easier go-to. Um,
Yeah.
so one of the things I'm thinking about here, I mean, you've definitely already, in my opinion, stood out and solidified yourselves as really appealing to the original comic art audience specifically. But if we were to fast forward a year or two into the future, what do you see for Nerdcrawler in terms of maybe appealing to comic book collectors overall? In other words, is original art just a starting point because you realize that there was a bit of a gap there in terms of an audience that you could service, but you have a broader vision? Or do you really want to maintain this focus on original comic art going forward?
Yeah, I would say in the near term, I just want to continue to get it really right for the original comic art community. But um, I would be lying if I said like there wasn't like a shinier, like bigger path in the future and the vision. And you use the term like virtual artist alley, and like sometimes in my conversations with advisors or things like that, it's like, what if you could do that? Like, what if you could actually make a truly like virtual comic book convention where creators could live in and talk about stuff, but also sell books and things like that. And I was on Living the Line with Carson and Sean. And I kind of shared that, like, yeah, the broader vision is to allow people to sell at a minimum like comics. So like we've already expanded to prints and commissions, and then comics is probably like the next place. But like I also recognize that folks like Shortboxed are doing amazing things
Right.
in the space to help people collect comics. I think where I would probably start is like, and this I kind of mentioned this with Carson and Sean on Living the Line, is like it's probably for the creators, like in the artists to start with. So like I think about like Frank, right? Shout out to Frank Cho, greatest member of Nerdcrawler. Thank you. Um, like he has a ton of comps in his house, like I imagine. And you think about like in my mind, like he had all these like amazing Savage Wolverine comics that like I'm sure people would love to get them all signed and bought. On Shortbox,
Right.
you can go get those graded 9/8 all day. That's awesome. But because of the way that Nerdcrawler has started, focused on the artist and the creator, like there could be a way someday where you're like, I want to see all of Frank's entire publication history. And then I want to be like, ooh, I really love his run on like the Ultimates or something, right? And you're like, click, 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 click. And I want them all signed, and then I want them all slabbed. Like that, I think could just be really cool. We're a long ways away from that future, but I think being a place for collectors, I think we are often underserved, and I think like if I can take a shot at making our space a little bit better and easier for collectors, that would be awesome. And I'm rambling now, but I'll just close with like I think about the next generation of collectors. Like one of the biggest fears I'm reading in our Facebook groups, both comic art collectors, but comic collectors, is like if we don't make it easy for the next generation to fall in love with these stories and these characters and this medium, like might we go the way of like other collectibles? And I'm a big believer that it is not Gen Z or beyond's job to love the things we love because we told them to. It's our job to make it approachable for them to collect those things. And so I think about a generation like my son's generation will be, it's like he probably just wants things really easy. He probably wants things really cool and really fast, but like how might you make that better? And I look at the landscape and I think there's a lot of opportunity to make things a little bit easier for the next generation of collectors too.
Well, you certainly do have the relationships in place already to expand beyond just what you're offering now. And in terms of making sure that it's as accessible as possible, I think if there's a platform that's set up to do it, I mean, you guys certainly are there, and you're already doing a lot. That is the talk of the virtual comic town. So, I really look forward to seeing what's next for
Yeah.
both yourself and Nerdcrawler as a platform.
Thanks, man. And it's like it feels weird. Like honestly, man, like it feels so weird that you say those things and it makes me nervous and blush because like it wasn't that long ago where I like went to MegaCon to like get dinner with Frank, and then I met Archer for the first time, and I was like talking with him and his wife, like Archer and, yeah, and his wife, and getting my Power Girl, piece that I got to show. And I was like, here's the postcard to like, and I literally have the postcard like right here. Like this is what we gave out, right? Like to as many artists as I could, that's what we gave out. And now like 6, 7 months later, he's like there, and it's like, oh yeah, Nerdcrawler is the talk of the town. And I was like, nobody cared. Nobody cared in January, you know? But it feels really good that we're making a difference for a lot of artists, and that's what matters.
And I mean, you definitely have made note of what was effective on other platforms and where, again, you could put something together that is more satisfying overall. I think veering away from the sniping, taking that kind of whatnot mechanism
Yep.
where there's the additional time, all of that stuff people are taking notice of and do appreciate. So I do think that your focus right now, obviously I'm game. I'm always about anything that is original art centric, but if it is a virtual artist alley experience that you're ultimately aiming for, signed copies of comics, and in particular maybe not the hottest variant that's out there, but those harder to find issues, that kind of thing I could see a lot of people really appreciating. And again, once the relationships are there with those creators, I don't see how you wouldn't be their first choice in terms of where they would go if they wanted to actually make that kind of material available.
Thanks, man. Yeah. 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 You're from your mouth to God, they say, right? Like, please, please.
I,
That would be amazing. Yeah.
I do think too that with OA, it is just due to the cost. It's something that isn't necessarily accessible to everybody who loves these characters in the medium. So while this is a great audience to kind of like really build your brand, down the road, I do think just like doing more in terms of comics and prints and still making it so that they can interact with their favorite creators. I think Nerdcrawler definitely sky's the limit. There's a lot that you guys can really do. And even though you do have some heavyweights that are already in the space.
Yeah. Yeah. And like one of the things you talked about is like just the accessibility of OA. Like one of the things that does make me chuckle sometimes in the comments about Nerdcrawler is like, oh, I wonder if it's just Nerdcrawler buying them up. And I'm like, I wish. Like I wish I I wish I could like do that. But like the reality is like, yeah, I think it's very cool to see all the awesome art. And then at the same time, a little part of me is like, darn, not for me, but then yeah, not for me. Yeah.
Well, I get people assume that everything I post is mine. And I'm
Yeah,
like,
right.
folks, there's no way. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely not. Like, I make sure that I kind of put in the comments, like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is something I picked up.
Yeah.
But again, I do think a lot of it is just in terms of what we're seeing, the activity, the new highs.
Yeah.
It's not happening like that on eBay. It's not happening that way on Heritage, particularly when you're talking about modern creators, people who've made a name for themselves in the last 10 to 15 years. I've seen just covers that are well known, stuff that you can see in a shop right now. The OA is up and essentially it flops, like still expensive, but no bids whatsoever. And then you come over to Nerdcrawler, people see what they see. And so they wonder what exactly is going on.
For sure.
But I do think a lot of it does come back to the fact that you are, solely focused on OA for the most part. And creators, I mean, they are promoting what they have to offer in their stories and their posts. And essentially stuff is coming across as though it's Nerdcrawler exclusive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, unless you actually go to the big con of that week and see, oh, so-and-so has it in that booth, online, the way it's presented, it's like on Nerdcrawler, like right now, this is for sale, which definitely also helps generate the buzz and has people saying to themselves, like, why is everybody talking about Nerdcrawler? Why are all of these creators offering the latest OA on Nerdcrawler? So all of it has worked to your advantage. I do think though, long term, in order for it to be bigger in comics in general, it is something to consider. Because I still deal with people who are like, OA, no way. Like in terms of just the cost, like I can't imagine getting $4,000 or $5,000, $3,000 and putting it towards one purchase like that. But they do love to see the art and again the access, which is a big part of what you're offering.
And I love the work like that you're like excellent with your verbiage. The word access, right, is really an important one. Like there, like Koi talks about this. Like and Koi's auctions are, you know, anywhere from like $100 to $400, right? Like his pencil sketches are amazing, and he basically just does whatever character he's thinking of that day. And then because you're buying it from Koi, he can throw in a little extra free sketch, right? Because you're buying a piece from Frank, I think just about every one, he always puts in like a little print signed or something like that. And it's like, to your point, it's because it's from them. That access is so special. And so I think that's one point. And the other thing I will say is, I think what Nerdcrawler, what I hope is also doing is that it encourages folks that if they are going to a convention and you see that price from like Artgerm or Frank at their table, yes, in the moment, I agree with you. Like $800 might be a good bid, but knowing that like it can actually go for so much more, like support that artist in that moment, right?
Yeah.
Get that commission that you were maybe sitting on the sideline and like, I'm gonna give her a shout out, like Miki, right? I bet you a lot of people were sleeping on Miki, being like,
Oh,
oh,
for
maybe
sure.
not, right? And now Miki is like literally getting life changing amounts of money, and and it's like maybe when the next time you see that artist and you go, $100, I don't know if they're worth it yet. Just know they could go on Nerdcrawler a couple months later and things could change,
Absolutely.
right? And so I would just say like support them now, right? If you can, like I know money's tight, but if you can, support your favorite creators now.
To that point too, because I'm glad you brought up Miki Okazaki. Because to me, that situation is fascinating. As
Yeah.
far as I'm concerned, I think she has maybe like what 4 or 5 published covers, not
Yeah.
that many. So
Yeah.
this isn't somebody who, people necessarily spotted at their LCS and have been
Hmm.
like collecting covers, and there's been that traditional build in terms of
Yeah.
attention. This is somebody who really has shot to the forefront pretty much as a sketch cover, all-star. People have taken notice of her that way. And I agree with you. I mean, if I were to go to a con where there are bigger names,
Hmm.
and I'm counting my cash, and I'm thinking, who am I going to actually go with? She wouldn't necessarily have been at the top of my list, not because of talent, but because
Yeah.
most people think of pursuing first and foremost the artist who they know from their favorite title right now. So
Hmm.
whoever it is who's doing cover art on the latest Daredevil run, etc., that's who
Hmm.
they're really eyeing in terms of who they want to commission. But because she hasn't had that presence yet when it comes to published covers, the way that she's just kind of taken off, to me, this is entirely based on Nerdcrawler, which isn't a bad thing, but people have their doubts and have a lot of questions about it because it is so new. Whatnot has produced, I think, some stars in terms of artists who have a lot of attention on that platform. Like Tyler Kirkham comes to mind.
Hmm.
Not that he
Hmm.
wasn't known outside of it, but really has a hardcore audience there. Javon Jordan. It's happened, but they're still dealing with stuff that's published.
Hmm.
Uh, so to me, with Miki just being able to put up, like a Dazzler sketch cover or something, and it goes for a crazy amount of money, it shows that there is something unique going on in terms of the audience on Nerdcrawler, what they're paying attention to, and they're making stars, not so much. They're not really going after just the established stars, the Art Germs
Hmm.
and the Frank Chos. They're creating stars essentially based on the OA work, the
Yeah.
commission work, which I think is different. And I haven't seen anything like this before. So I do look forward not only to seeing the new highs from her work, but who's the next Miki Okazaki? Because it definitely makes me say, if I spot somebody selling something on Nerdcrawler that I might overlook or maybe would have thought about overlooking a couple of weeks back, well, the covers are going for $300 now. If this is the next Miki Okazaki, this might be $3,000 in a few
Right.
months. Let me get my bid in now.
Right. Yeah. And I think what's interesting too is like we can anchor to moments in time, like the community talks about the old days, like going to an early 90s convention and going up to like a Bill Sienkiewicz and getting something for like $10, right? And
Right.
like that kind of stuff, right? And now it's like I can't possibly. I think what Nerdcrawler is able to do in this digital age is like just get exposure to more moments like that, where an artist who might not have gotten the reach or visibility that they might warrant and deserve, because Miki's work has been great. But now she has a platform to get in front of some collectors who otherwise might not have ever seen her, as you kind of mentioned, right? Like people in hard to get to countries or cities. And that doesn't mean that the buyer shouldn't be able to get access, and that doesn't mean the seller should never be able to sell to them. Like, to your point, I love that word, access. Like, Nerdcrawler gives you access to these artists and creators that you might not be able to. And like, again, it goes back to like, support your favorite creators now. Like,
Yeah,
like there's a conversation also of like Daniel Warren Johnson, right? Like, I think I saw some mention that like, oh, only 5 or 10 years ago you could have gotten a Daniel Warren Johnson page for like, a couple $100, and now it's like, yeah. So like, to those who supported him early, you were an early patron, and therefore you should receive the gains that he has also
absolutely.
been able to get. And for those who support him now, thank you, right? And similarly for folks like Miki or whoever will come up next, it's like, support like who you like and support them now. And whether, another thing, because like I also kind of collect statues, is like whether they 10x or 100x their portfolio, or it just kind of stays the same. Know that like you're supporting a creator who likely needs it, and you have a wonderful piece of art in your home now that like you can cherish forever. And if it goes up, great. But if it doesn't go up, that's okay too. You describe the value, and whatever happens after that, know that you supported an artist and you got something really cool.
Makes perfect sense to me. One last thing, because I know you're a busy guy and you got to go. Just thinking about that idea of creating the next big thing. The next in demand artist. Have you thought about artist variants or artist exclusives on your platform? So this goes back to the idea of maybe expanding beyond OA at some point. I don't know, like maybe the first published DC cover from Miki Okazaki should be a Nerdcrawler exclusive. That's
Yeah.
something that I don't know if you've thought about, but because you're in this unique position where there is an audience that's already there and supporting her with their hard-earned money, to amazing highs. Do you see yourself being in a position where you could work with the big two or other publishers and maybe facilitate that kind of connection where artists who really have a pretty scant publishing history maybe can get some exclusives under their belt via Nerdcrawler,
Yeah.
and in that way kind of build their portfolio and build their fan base?
Um, I will say yes, and this is then to your viewers or you. If anyone knows how to do that stuff and anyone has those relationships, please slide into my DMs. Like, I don't know how that stuff works. Like, I've worked in, I've had some comic book experience and tech experience, but like, I love that idea. And if anyone knows how to do that stuff, let's talk.
Thank you for checking out the Fandamn Collectibles YouTube channel. If you like this content, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you subscribe, and stay tuned because we'll be back before you know it.